So the US Federal Reserve has a new chair, the king of the castle.
King in the castle, king in the castle. Oh, go do this, go do this.
So after Kevin Warsh's first meeting as Fed chair, gold and silver have dropped like a stone. And it all comes down to Kevin Warsh talking tough about inflation.
I've said for years inflation is a choice. The Fed statement says that inflation is primarily determined by monetary policy. You bet it is. And today I'm announcing that this committee unambiguously and unanimously have decided we are going to deliver on that.
Now, there's a bit of a backstory to this meeting here with some drama between the outgoing Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and Donald Trump. Now, Trump was pressuring Powell to lower interest rates.
On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
Essentially because Powell wasn't lowering interest rates like Trump wanted. Now that sets the scene for the incoming Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, who was handpicked by Donald Trump. That is not a conspiracy theory, that is a provable fact. Now, Trump brought in Warsh to lower interest rates, just like he wanted Powell to. But Warsh wasn't able to do so at his first meeting because we've seen some inflation from the war in the Middle East, a rising oil price, and the pressure that puts on the rest of the economy. All of which meant that in Warsh's first meeting, he maintained interest rates where they were instead of cutting them or raising them. Now, this point about not raising interest rates either is also really key because in the meeting, he talked really tough about fighting inflation.
We have the capability and commitment to deliver on our price stability objective of 2%. That's exactly what we're going to do.
He went as far as to say that inflation is a choice by central banks. Now, I agree with him on that. Inflation is a choice by central banks. Printing lots of currency and keeping interest rates low is a choice by central banks that does lead to inflation. But Kevin Warsh insinuating that his Federal Reserve would be different and his Federal Reserve would do what's required to fight inflation, to me, is a bad joke. The butt of which is anybody who believes it and makes financial decisions based off the back of it. If you truly believe that the Federal Reserve, which has created massive inflation over the 100 years or so that it's been in existence, has now turned the tables and decided that they're going to be serious about fighting inflation, then by all means, sell your bullion, your inflation hedge assets. Get rid of them, because in your world, inflation's gone. But for those of us who live in reality and think that central banks will just continue to do what they've always done, and this is nothing more than empty words about controlling inflation in a system designed for inflation to rip, this just presents an incredible buying opportunity. The fact that the market seems to believe that Kevin Warsh is an inflation hawk that will bring back the dollar is insane to me. This is a man who openly stated during the global financial crisis that the US should print as much money as needed to fix it. Now, what makes us so confident that Kevin Warsh is telling lies here? We know the situation that the Fed's in. Every increase in interest rates means an increase in the interest they pay on their massive $39 trillion debt, which pushes them further into a budget deficit, making the whole situation even worse. Now, a big reason why I believe in the precious metals is because of the debt, specifically US government debt. Now, with the US federal government in $39 trillion of debt and going $2 trillion further into debt every year, it is unpayable at current interest rates, let alone at higher rates. Now, Kevin Warsh hinted in his announcement that we should expect higher interest rates. So what that means is for the debt they've got, the interest repayments go from about $1 trillion a year upwards in a big way. Now, how much? Well, it depends how high the rates go. At a 10% interest rate, that's $3.9 trillion a year in interest repayments. So if we pull up the US debt clock, we can see that the US is $39 trillion in debt. Now, it does bring in almost $5.5 trillion a year in US federal tax revenue, but it spends over $7.1 trillion a year in US federal spending alone, with $1 trillion of that being just interest on the national debt. Now, if the US government wanted to just break even here, they would have to increase federal tax revenue by over 30%. Now, the idea that the Federal Reserve is going to increase interest rates and increase the interest on that debt from $1 trillion to 2 or 3 or even $4 trillion at a 10% interest rate is untenable. Now, this puts them in a corner where they can do either one or two things. Honestly, collapse on that debt, say $39 trillion, mate, we can't pay it, sorry, or print their way out. Now, if you look back at history, they choose the printer every single time. Now, Kevin also mentioned that he was going to bring in all these new flash task forces that were going to investigate what's going on and fix everything. Now, I'm not that old, but I've been around long enough to have heard similar things before from the Fed. To believe that a Trump pick is serious about fighting inflation is not a position that Liberty Bullion is going to take. Now, to be real here, if we're serious about fighting inflation, which we should be, rates need to go up. They should have gone up. He should have raised them, but he didn't. He talked tough about inflation. He talked about rate rises later this year, but he did not raise rates, even though the European Central Bank raised them last week. So he can talk tough as much as he wants, and it is a good idea. I agree with him. Inflation is a choice by central banks, but it's all talk. That's all it is. Now, if the Fed were to fight inflation here, it would suck. It would mean massively higher interest rates, which would bankrupt a lot of people who are deep in debt. Everybody who's living beyond their means on credit cards, everybody who's levered up on real estate or shares, everybody who's levered up to start a business, all of them wiped out. And it sucks that in order to save a currency, that immense economic pain needs to be felt. Because of quantitative easing and artificially low interest rates for over a decade, there has been a lot of speculative pressure built up in financial markets and real estate more broadly. The natural unwinding of all of this speculative activity is gonna hurt. But all this pain is just the natural yet unfortunate part of economic cycles. Look back at the 1700s with the Mississippi bubble. Look back at Weimar Germany. Look back at the 1970s. Now, in all of those scenarios, the average person got hurt in a big way, but those who invested wisely made out like bandits. Now, the way to be wise when government debt is unpayable is to bet on inflation. And that's exactly what you're doing when you're buying gold, silver, and platinum. What a time to be alive.